Today I want to talk about this thing called vertical development. It's also called maturity, leadership maturity. In some places, it's also called adult development. Some places, sometimes it's called growing up. And I'm kind of quivering at this topic because I want to get it precise, and yet I know I won't get it. But here, I want to start with the larger frame within which vertical development comes out. And then I want to chart the different stages of vertical development according to at least one model, the maturity framework. So here it goes. First and foremost, we live in an evolutionary cosmos. So vertical development is like an evolutionary map of our own interiors. So what do we mean by we live in an evolutionary cosmos? So we often hear that and we think, oh, Darwin, oh, X and Y chromosomes coming together, oh, natural selection, mutation. Yeah, that's all part of evolution, but that's just a small part of evolution. That's biological evolution, and only kind of one aspect of biological evolution. But I'm talking about the greatest story ever told, which is that there was nothing, there was no thing, and then about 13.8 billion years ago, there was something, right? The Big Bang started. And so this evolutionary process, the principle at play is that parts come together to form larger wholes that are greater than the sum of its parts, right? And so at the very beginning of the Big Bang, you had subatomic particles, whether they were quarks or whatever they might be discovered and defined as these days. They came together to form protons and neutrons, right? And then the electrons came along. These particles came together and formed atoms. And so for billions of years, you had the physiological, the matter actually organizing around these, with these energy, with these four forces, right? We're talking about gravity, the strong and weak, strong and weak nuclear force, electromagnetism. With all these forces, you had galaxies form, you had solar systems, stars, solar systems form. Billions of years of this process, of this massive, gigantic universe, and potentially there's multiverses, right? But in this universe, that's how it all kind of came together until about, was it 6 billion years ago or 4 billion years? I'm kind of forgetting at this point. Life on Earth, the conditions were just right so that life on Earth could pop up, right? So parts, stars, a star, which is our sun, and planets came together to form a larger whole, which is actually single cell life. And so it's actually more complex than a star or than a planet is what is life, because it's living, right? There's metabolic processes, and we don't have to go into that. So I'm just tracing evolution here is what I want to do. And so then we had a couple billion years later, single cell organisms came together to form a larger whole, which was called multicellular organisms, right? And that gave way to fungi, and you have plant life, which gave way. It's kind of made possible. Fungi made possible plant life made possible animal life made possible mammal life, and then within the mammal life, conditions were right so that various pre-human beings came through, and then we had the Homo sapiens, right? And Homo sapiens, for the first time, could reflect, right? Prior to that, there was consciousness. There was always consciousness, but it was unable to self-reflect, and actually, the mind was unable to evolve and develop and create in a way that Homo sapiens now were able to do. Also, because the brain, what happened was there was more complexity, right? The human brain is the most complex thing that we know of, right? More complex, more nodes of connection in the brain than in the stars in the sky, right? So the more complexity there was, the more consciousness that was able to come through and be experienced. And so, of course, the opposable thumbs, the body evolved to adapt and become more versatile and more able to actually create in this world, right? And so, what happened is you had now civilizations start to grow. You had hunter gatherers that were able to live and develop small clans. You had um, pre-agricultural kind of horticultural societies, and then larger organization of agricultural agrarian societies. Every step of the way, there were great things that came out of it. For example, in agricultural societies, you had much larger, more people could be fed, and so you could have larger cooperation. Actually larger towns could be built and more stability in a certain sense. And there's also disasters at every stage, right? Every stage within human evolution, there was destruction too, right? And so, but then every subsequent stage was able to solve the problems of the previous stage, but then they created new ones, right? So anyway, you had agrarian civilization that art and culture began to emerge, right? You had kind of larger empires that organized across much larger spaces and types of people. You had the nation state eventually came online, and then you had and this I might be getting some of this out of order, but the point is, then you had various stages in human history of cultural transformation, like the Renaissance, right, in the 15th century, after a dark period of kind of regression in culture. You had the Renaissance, where an entirely new worldview was birthed. Within that same physical human, basically, you had a new worldview emerge, which is the rational scientific worldview, where for the first time, we didn't just look for some divine revelation or some passed down wisdom to tell us what to do and how to live our lives. We actually could realize, wait a minute, I am an autonomous sovereign agent that can use rationality and logic and methodologies to disclose the objective world of reality, right? So we had all the sciences come out of that. Physics, you had, um, everything that had to do with, objectively create, taxonomies of understanding the world, right? And then also that the implications for that came out of it, which is that, oh, I'm autonomous. That means, and there's actually some, sense that every human being is autonomous and sovereign, and there's sort of human rights implications that came out of that. Um, you had massive technological innovations. Eventually, democracy was the new form of governance that came out of it. Now, of course, all this emerged with so many great things for those that were the dominant peoples, but we've obliterated the indigenous communities. We've destroyed much of the earth and the biosphere. We've actually kind of committed violence against the self, right, in modern times. But that's basically what brought forth the modern era, which is actually causes violence to the human body based on our massive focus on productivity and efficiency and goal orientation at the expense of what's emergent and responding to the needs of the moment. So that was the modern era, and then so what happened is that we felt separate. We feel separate. We still feel we actually Homo sapiens was so good at thinking and reflecting, and that it actually felt like it was separate from the rest of reality and sort of pretended like it is, which is all the symptoms that we experience in our society today. That's what's going on, right? And then about 50 to 100 years ago, Homo sapiens started to be like, wait a minute, we're creating our own prison here. There's more to life. And And the stories that have been created so far have been privileging certain groups and destroying others and destroying the environment. And so we're going to break free and start telling new stories and start questioning all the stories of civilization, capitalism, whatever it might be, and and um, and basically try alternative ways of living. Right? There's alternative worldviews. There's more inclusion. So the postmodern revolution came about to kind of solve a lot of the issues of the modern kind of the Renaissance informed stage of humanity, and wanted to reject the mainstream, right? So, and that's actually the time during which humans first started to discover that these stages all happen within us individually. So here's where vertical development started to come online. Research from 50 plus years ago, Jane Loevinger and others, Piaget and others, realized, wait a minute, if we kind of interview a bunch of people over time, we start to see patterns that people have the capacity to evolve through reliable or predictable stages of development. And it just so happens that those individual stages actually mirror or parallel the stages of human culture that's, since the beginning, the last 250,000 years, right? Interesting. So what does that say? That the same principles are at play within the cosmos, within evolution itself, as it is within the human individual and even within collectives. Okay, so that's important to notice, right? So for the first time, humans started to realize that evolution is happening within themselves in the postmodern era, and that we could participate in it through, so the vertical development field that came out of it made us realize that there's actually a map and there's a process that we can participate conscious in. So for the first time, we actually became conscious evolutionaries. So we could unlock the mysteries of the interiors, and the kind of the trend of this development, of this spiral of evolution, of this trajectory of vertical development, moves toward more inclusivity, toward more expressions of uniqueness, toward an increased ability to hold paradox, right? To be able to go within and discover and inquire just as much as we can go outside of ourselves. So increasing ability to access both interiors and exteriors, an increasing ability to include more people and more of reality beyond myself, an increasingly large time span. So not, today to multi-generations, multi-thousands of years, right? Ability to hold an increasingly integrated sense of self that is not separate from the rest of reality. So those are some of the kind of the trends of development, of vertical development. So now let's go into what are these stages. And I've already kind of alluded to them when I talked about the stages of human history, but I'll go into more detail when I talk about each stage of vertical development. So the first stage is called self-centric. Okay, self-centric, and it's pretty obvious what that refers to. It's all about me and my very close group of people, my family, right? So it's about protecting, getting what I need right now, right? Immediate gratification. So the time frame is basically kind of the now, or days, maybe weeks potentially, but it's all about kind of immediate self-preservation protection. And it's often really, really connected kind of from the body. It's impulse driven. And none of this has to be negative necessarily. It's actually there's a lot of important things about it. And so when I give examples of each of the stages, I'm going to give examples of how you and I can access that right now within our own interiors. So let's look at the self-centric stage. An example of when we access our self-centric stage, because all the previous stages live within us, no matter how far we are in the maturity and the advanced stages, right? So the earliest stage, the self-centric stage, is all within us. Sometimes we repress it or ignore it or deny it or neglect it. But the invitation for vertical development is actually to integrate every stage within ourselves. So how do we integrate our self-centric stage? Well, anytime we honor our bodily needs, right? So when we ask ourselves, what do I need right now? And we listen to the impulse, the desire, oh, I need to sleep. Oh, I need food. I'm hungry. Oh, I need connection with someone, right? Whatever it is. So being able to be in touch with our body. So even very quickly, just sort of putting your hand on your belly, that's a great place to start, to feel that impulse of what the body needs. And then moving toward it, not thinking our way toward it necessarily, but moving toward it, right? It's very now do it here kind of quality. So that's the self-centric. Let's go to the next stage, group-centric. That's another obvious descriptor, right? The group-centric, it's all about the group. So now instead of just my little short, small family group, it can be a group of people not biologically connected to me, right? So it could be a large family, but it also could be a clan or a religious group or a corporation or a nation even, right? And so there's a wide range of how far we draw the boundary out there. The time zone or the time duration, the window of time that one is able to experience at this stage may be a year. It could be basically the cycles of a year, right? Early on in our human history, the group-centric stage was associated with the agricultural, the agrarian stage. And so we started to become really just connected with the cycles of the land and the capacity to see beyond that. It was kind of irrelevant. Like, why plan 10 years down the road if every year the cycle is going to happen again, right? At this group-centric stage, we can start to connect with other people beyond ourselves, right? And so anytime, so here's an example, how do we access that? Anytime we feel drawn to participate in a group and kind of want to go with the flow of the group, maybe we want to, if you've ever sung with people and you're all singing on the same tune, you can feel that, right? Maybe you play sports with people, those of you that are on the same team, you feel bonded to more after that, right? Anytime you put on clothing that reinforces the sameness between you and the larger group is an example. And also anytime we sacrifice something of our immediate needs for the sake of others or for the sake of a longer term need that includes someone else. Okay? So those are signs that we're able to access this group-centric stage within us. Next stage, skill-centric. Skill-centric, also called the expert stage. But this is when I realize that, okay, I'm part of this group, but there's something that makes me unique, that I have a unique skill set and a unique craft or expertise that other people in the group don't have. And so I need to master this skill set in order to fulfill the need of the group, right? So that's the skill-centric. And so I'm still committed to the group generally, but I'm actually more committed to the craft and the expertise, which is based on some authority of experts that determine this is how a craft should be done, right? So I'm willing to actually leave the group if my kind of expert community or my authorities tell me to, or the implications are that I need to move to another place that needs my skills more than this group that I'm part of, right? But it's still very closely bound to a relatively small group. Time span is kind of a few years. Imagine the time it takes to enroll in a training program or a certification or something like that. Like, oh, I can commit myself to that and focus on on making that happen kind of efficiently over the next couple of years, right? So here's an example of when we experience our skill-centric capacity or stage within us. Anytime I feel like an expert, like a specialist, anytime I assert my opinion for some ideal or standard way of doing something, and I feel like, oh, this is the right way to do it, or this is the proper way to do something according to this field or expertise. Next stage, self-determining stage. This is where it's I start to realize that, wait a minute, beyond my expertise, beyond my group, I can set my sights on anything. I actually can view, in certain sense, the future or my ideal vision of the future, and fulfill my desires to achieve that. This is sometimes called the achiever stage, right? So I'm driven to achieve something of what I want, and I'm not guided so much by rules of the correct way and the incorrect way of doing something as I would kind of in the skill-centric or the group-centric stage. I'm actually more driven by this sense of universal principles, right? There's universal principles of success, let's say, that if I could just harness and align with, it's more about harnessing. Like I actually make them, I biohack, right? Or I life hack my way into them, right? I can create rules to serve my goal, right? And so time frame here is a little bit longer, right? I can think beyond any sense of cycles, 3, 5, maybe even 10 years in the future, and enough to where I can kind of envision something and then predict and plan activities and make something happen, executing on a goal, right? So what are some examples of this self-determining stage within us? If we've developed to this stage, of course. If we haven't, we can imagine potentially, but do the best we can. But anytime I feel like I'm inspired to set goals for myself that are beyond any particular group or expertise or organization. It's just, this is, I want to achieve these goals, right? And it's not bound by any authority approving or disapproving of them or supporting them, right? It's just sort of like, this is what I want to do. And, it could be I'm creating a new business, an entrepreneurial initiative never done before, and I don't have skills per se to do it. I'm an entrepreneur, so I do it, right? Or kind of an exercise regimen that you just take it upon yourself to do, or you start something new in that sense. So that's an example of a self-determining. Now notice though, the self-determining is still bound by our perception of the principles of reality, of these laws, universal laws that if I could only harness for myself and biohack my way into something, then I can achieve whatever I want, right? There's a very strong orientation and agency to making things happen. Next stage, self-questioning. This is where it all falls apart. Not quite all falls apart, but this is where we realize the futility of our constant orientation to achieve and biohack my way into achieving whatever I want. We start to realize the limitations of my agency, that I can't make anything happen as long as I just put enough effort into it. That there are some mysterious forces at work that I don't understand. I have no idea what they are. So I start to ask myself questions. That's why it's called self-questioning, right? Who am I? What am I really here for? What do I really want? Right? And we start to discover the entire world of our own interior. That, oh, wow, if I really focus on my inner feelings, I can gain more wisdom and knowledge about myself. that it's not what it seems at the beginning, at the surface, that an anger is not just something I have to suppress, but anger is something that actually reveals something about me. It's an invitation to learn about the sources of that anger, maybe my early childhood experience, right? Maybe I have dreams. I start to pay attention to my dreams more, and I don't see them as predictions per se. I see them as the mind's playground or the mind's sort of laboratory, and I can question them and start to put the patterns together. And so at the self-questioning stage, I engage any and all non-rational forms of knowing, right? Altered states of all kinds, meditative states, or at least that they start to become open to me and I start to become curious, right? The time frame is my entire life through early childhood. So a lot of people at this stage are always talking about, oh, my early childhood wounds influenced me this way, and this is something this is a pattern that I tend to struggle with the last 30 years or whatever. So I'm in self-questioning. I'm able to kind of, and I'm also able to imagine a future. John Lennon, imagine there's no country. Imagine, an ideal world, not just imagine a vision for your business, right? Stage 4 is self-determining, but imagine what could be, right? So our capacities just start to just grow in such deep and profound ways. This is a very big pivotal point. So in vertical development, the self-questioning stage is known as the first stage in post-conventionality because we actually liberate ourselves or sometimes push against conventional norms of success, definitions, principles of success. We start to question anything that's universal altogether. In fact, we come out of it thinking that there is no reality. What is real? Everything seems relative. That my truth is different than your truth. There's no way to, how do we connect on those? You do you, I do me, right? That everything is context dependent. All practices and truths are really related to culture and where people come from, right? And so it can be a very confusing stage. It can certainly be a very liberating stage too, because you can kind of reinvent yourself. So let's think about examples of when we might access our self-questioning stage if we've been able to reach, if we're there at this point. So anytime that we're questioning everything about society, right? When we're interested more in the journey than the destination, maybe when we're drawn to kind of alternative lifestyle choices that don't conform to the larger culture. Also, when we start to empathize and seek inclusion of all the marginalized groups, right? And so just um, tagging for now, sidebar here is, what does this look like from the perspective of a marginalized group? That's whole nother conversation, right? But this is what's been discovered through the stages of development and vertical development. But presumably even there, it's then you start to realize that in my own marginalized group, I tend to marginalize people, right? So that's something. Or maybe I actually go and find another group. At this stage, I question my own marginalized group, right? So anytime that we experience that, anytime we say something like it's all relative or all depends on context or, I think you get the point at this point. That's self-questioning. Next stage, self-actualizing. Self-actualizing. So at some point in the self-questioning journey, we start to realize that while it seems like everything is kind of context dependent and relative, we start to see patterns that still seem to emerge cross-culturally, patterns between my subjective story and viewpoint and yours. And we start to see the deeper patterns that connect. We start to see kind of more intrinsic first values, first principles that drive the whole thing, right? So we start to see the patterns that connect. We start to see that the context-dependent stories that are created are actually intrinsic values themselves. So perspective actually is a very real value of the universe, right? Context is a very real value of the universe. Interiority and exteriority are values of the universe. They're principles of reality. So while my interior is different than yours, we both have interiors, for example. We also start to see that growth itself is a principle of the cosmos. Evolution is a principle of the cosmos. That development is real. Just like an acorn becomes a sapling, becomes an oak tree, that is a principle of the cosmos that is everywhere at work, right? And so, and there's also that there's typologies. There are different types. There's kind of the masculine quality and the feminine qualities. There's the, whether you want to go different astrological types, but there's typologies, right? And there's, so the interest at this stage becomes aligning with those principles and developing mastery at subtly attuning to them and kind of utilizing them and this is where the field of vertical development usually comes really alive. People at this stage really are all about, that's what this vertical development is basically disclosing here, right? These are principles and we can participate in them. But that's not it. There's more. And well, it just in terms of timeline and self-actualizing, we start to realize we can look beyond just my lifetime, right? We can talk about leaving a legacy, looking at kind of multiple generations in the past and multiple generations in the future, and truly look at the planet as a whole, beyond even my people, beyond my nation, beyond even all of humanity, but actually really incorporate non-human creatures and non-living entities as well, right? An example, if you're there, kind of, if you have this capacity, if the stage is in you, an example is whenever you are able to really hold the paradox of relativism and intrinsic value and principles, meaning things are relative and also there is deep intrinsic truths at the same time. And basically anytime you are really excited and allured to grand, large, integrative stories that provide a map of reality that makes room for the relativity and also the deep principles, right? So if you have kind of an evolutionary story that you're really excited about, or integrative worldview, right? Love is real. Love is real. The mysteries are within us. So it's really kind of an interesting stage, because there's also just very few people here. It can be lonely, but it's like oh, you see things that other people don't, and you wonder, who am I? What's there to, like, how can I participate in this? You start to feel like you're being lived more by some larger force, and you're more humble at this stage than you were at stage, the stage of self-determining. You're like, okay, I want to master these deep principles and kind of be a co-creator and participant in them, but I also surrender to this mysterious force. Which leads me to the last stage, to the next stage anyway. And I started kind of bleeding into that as I was just talking right now. But the next stage is construct aware, also called ego aware at times. Construct aware. So this is where we start to realize, yes, okay, evolution, first principles, development, growth, interiors, exteriors, yes, they're all real, but wait a minute. we actually we create constructs in order to access them, or in order to point them out. But the way that we construct that map actually is made up in a sense. You know, in other words, for example, there's many maps of vertical development, and they use different names, and you know, where do we draw the line between one stage and another? Actually, we could say there's 50 stages, and you find more and more degrees of granularity if we wanted to, and we could create another map that includes all of the maps, and it's like there's like a near infinite number of ways to construct our perception of these first values and first principles. So there's not like there's one first value out there we point to. Our construction of the meaning to disclose that first value actually makes a huge impact as well. And so it's just like wait a minute, I thought I could master these principles and know them, but there's so many different ways to do it, and maybe I can't. Maybe ultimately I can't use them to create leadership development. Maybe maybe my coaching practice is only one small part of someone's infinite set of connections in their life and influences that, like, wait a minute, who am I anyways? Who am I to the pump the arrogance to think that I can create and co-create and participate with these laws, and I'm going to make that big of a difference? There's a certain quality of, again, like another humility that the very ego itself is created, and that while it is part of the fabric of reality, it is a dynamic created entity or construct that ultimately is woven into the fabric of reality, kind of at the deepest level, and really there's not a separation for sure. And what's more accurate is to say I'm being lived by the mystery, if you would, so that there's really no separation between me doing anything in the world and it being done to me. It's all happening in, as, and through me simultaneously. And so I am a participant, but even the choice to participate is something that doesn't come from me, right? Even the desire to participate isn't sourced in me. It's sourced in the very field of all of reality that gives rise to this unique experience that is me. That I am a unique expression of that field, of that. And again, all these words can be, you know, mixed with others and clarified in different ways, but the ones I'm using right now are useful approximates to say that I am a unique face of the evolutionary process, that there is a desire in the very process itself, in the field of all of reality, that manifests uniquely through me, that desires through me, and that there's like, in a certain sense, there's a calling from the field that is matched with my desire. And in that sense, there's a unique set of gifts that I can give to a unique set of needs. And those are always evolving and changing and dynamic. And so in a certain sense, I'm devoted to the mystery, and I'm surrendering to be lived as love, if you will. I'm held in the mystery, and it's just this is where the words just start to break down at some point. Here, the time frame is potentially centuries, right? It could be, you know, I'm looking for trillions of generations in the future. That's a lot, and that's a lot. But you know, the idea is like I can look back and see how the patterns of civilization have moved precisely to find us right here at this point, and that my action and participation and everything that is happening here is going to make an impact on hundreds of years in the future and millions of people, right? And it's a mystery. It's a mysterious realization, but it is a real one that actually that I am a cosmic being that transcends time and space, and so time is actually a fluid. A time is it's real at some level, right? And actually, there is I can and this is really hard to put into words here, but I can place my acupuncture point on the body of all time and space and know that it ripples across. And it ripples into the past and it ripples into the future, into this sort of morphic resonance field. So that's pretty big, long time. But there's one more stage that has been articulated, at least in vertical development theory, and that's just called unity, the unity stage. And there's beyond, right? And the further you go into these stages, the less clear it becomes as to what they actually are. Partly because there's so few people that access it, but also partly because that's sort of the nature of these stages, is that the later stages become harder and harder to precisely get in words. But let's just say, for example, or for as an attempt, the unity stage, it's all about paradox. So at this stage, we really, and this is my attempt at this, and I could be way off because I don't think I'm even here, not even close, But I can get a whiff of it and a sense of it, and will do my best at just sort of putting it out there. And that is that the very utterance of a word paradoxically discloses something, but also hides something or covers it up at the same time. That any action I take simultaneously affects the whole thing, and there's no separation between action and stillness, and kind of contemplation and activism, if you will. That the mystery is, it can't be known, but it can be approximated. It's like basically the ability to hold an infinite number of paradoxes and still live, I suppose. That I'm fulfilling my destiny and I have not, there is no destiny, and I'm failing at fulfilling my destiny. I am real and I'm also not real. I mean, I can't even begin to even describe it. But there's the sense that, and Mark Gaffney uses this phrase that so beautifully works at this stage, but it works with every stage, is that heaven is not paradise, it's paradox. Maybe you can get a sense of what that would mean. Heaven is not paradise, but paradox. So we think of heaven as being the deepest nature of reality, the most real. If we're able to hold, the more paradoxes we're able to hold within our being, basically means that the bigger our being is, the more we are identified with the very deepest realm of reality itself. So I don't know if any of this makes any sense, but it was my attempt to kind of walk us through a little journey together. Maybe it was a little journey. It was a journey for me just to go through it. I mean, as I was describing each of the stages, I could feel them kind of unfolding in me. And so in that sense, this gets back to the utility of vertical development, is that it is psychoactive. And by psychoactive, I mean just by learning these distinctions, learning the map, it somehow points out potentials within ourselves And in that sense, we can go back to the beginning where I said that for the first time in human history, we have become aware of our participation in evolution. We have become aware that we are evolutionaries. We are self-conscious of our role in the unfolding tapestry, which is this evolutionary cosmos. So I'll stop there and just say that may you feel the impulse to evolve within yourself, and that may all beings be carried in that current of evolution and participate in more and more love.